it's very, very schizophrenic in the sense that on the one hand, indeed, they go raise billions from the Muslim world, and they're also looking to invest in top entrepreneurial talent, regardless of whether it's Muslim or not. But on the other hand, you have got a partner who makes those inflammatory comments, and not even in a private context. He goes on Twitter. That's pretty much making a very, very public statement. I understand about freedom of speech, but there's a big difference between freedom of speech in a private context, and there's quite another position of going, shouting discriminatory statements from the rooftops.
Hello everyone and welcome back to another episode of Majlis Markets. As always, I'm your host Hassan Jivraj. Before we begin this podcast, please remember to like, share and subscribe, and also leave us a rating wherever you're watching or listening to this podcast. But now I'd like to introduce a guest for the third time, a good friend of mine, Reza Jafrali. Reza, welcome back to Majlis Markets.
Thank you, Hassan. Salaam alaikum. Peace upon you all. Lovely to meet you, to speak to you again, Hassan, and greetings to all the audience.
So Reza, it's the third time you've been on Majlis Markets. I think that's the first hat trick for a guest on our podcast. And, the last podcast that we did, I was just checking it before we started recording. It was back in June, which is crazy to think that's quite a while ago, coming towards the end of the year now. Since the last podcast, what have you been up to?
A fair amount has happened. What I can say is that there'll be a number of developments. You know that my company in Luxembourg is No Hunger, and the mission of No Hunger is to address the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals through the use of space technologies, financed through the impact, ethical, and Islamic capital markets. Since we've last spoken, we've been on a number of UNSDG missions. We should be, inshallah, announcing soon a very large project involving health in Africa, especially involving two major countries on the African continent. And indeed, we are looking at empowering health solutions, empowering affordable health solutions through the use of the Islamic capital markets. We've also been looking at climate adaptation, climate mitigation, especially for the maritime sector, where there is a massive need of fresh capital. And lately, we've been looking at what is most important in our world, water. But over to you.
I really want to talk to you today. There's a story that's been happening over the summer. Actually, it's been happening maybe even a little bit before then. And I thought of you straight away when I heard about this. Earlier this year, I think it was a senior executive at Sequoia Capital. For people who don't know Sequoia Capital, it's probably one of the most well-known and probably one of the biggest venture capital funds in the world. And they're very famous in the sense that they've invested in a lot of startups that we all know and a lot of brands that we know as well. I mean, people can go Google what kind of startups. And they've been early stage investors in a lot of companies. And so it's a very successful company. I think they manage around $50 or $60 billion. Maybe I'll double check that after and put it in the show notes. But they're a very well-known company. They're very well-known in Silicon Valley. But they were in the news earlier this year, and also probably in October, when the Financial Times picked up a story that their COO, she resigned. And the reason why this is interesting is that this senior executive in Sequoia tweeted, or he put out a social media post about Zohran Mamdani, who's now the mayor-elect of New York City. It's no secret that Zohran Mamdani, he is overtly Muslim, and although he didn't make that a big part of his campaign, he has said he is Muslim and he's pro-Palestinian. And this particular executive, I think his name's Shaun Maguire.
Indeed, it is.
And he made a tweet. And it was for me, it wasn't that controversial, but for a lot of people, I think he mentioned about something about Islamism and that the West is going to learn the hard way. I think he said Zohran Mamdani comes from a culture which lies and the West is going to learn the hard way, something along these lines. I'm paraphrasing what he said. And obviously a lot of people took outrage to that at the time, particularly in the sense that also Sequoia has a lot of investments or co-investments and has raised funds from the Muslim world and from Muslim entrepreneurs and Muslim investors. So obviously this led to a lot of outrage on social media and indeed in the wider Silicon Valley. I think also there was a big letter signed by a lot of people, including people like Sam Altman, who's the founder of OpenAI and ChatGPT. They condemned the comments. And what's interesting about this is that the COO, the Financial Times story, which was being reported in October, the COO basically, she resigned and she complained to senior management about the comments that Shaun Maguire made. Should be said that Shaun Maguire did try and roll back some of his comments. He didn't fully retract it, but he rolled back and he was trying to clarify what he was saying. But he didn't retract his statement, and he still stood by what he said. And this COO, this senior person in Sequoia, who's practicing Muslim female, she'd been at the company for quite some time, and she had been involved in quite a few of their project, and she complained to senior management. And the senior management, basically, to cut a long story short, has basically said not condemned these comments and said that in the name of free speech and neutrality, they're not going to take any action against Shaun Maguire. And now, what was interesting in this Financial Times article, which I'll link in the show notes, is that Shaun Maguire apparently is very good friends with Elon Musk, which is quite a strategic. So I bring it back. I don't mean to go on a little diatribe or a little monologue here, but like what I wanted to say was, I thought of you straight away about this whole thing, and it just got me really thinking. And I talked to a few other people as well, and it's not surprising, to be honest. Actually, do you know the actual way I heard out about the news is I saw a tweet from Mehdi Hassan from Zateo News, very well-known Muslim journalist. And he's not everybody's cup of tea, but his tweet really amplified what he was saying. And I thought about you straight away, and thought about the challenges that you faced as well, and that are facing at this point in time. And I've spoken to other entrepreneurs and startup founders from a Muslim background or have Muslim solutions. But I just wanted off the cuff, what are your initial thoughts, or what are your thoughts about this whole debacle at Sequoia?
Well, thank you for giving a very good background, because indeed one needs to understand a number of things about, because this is a story where you need to understand the various stakeholders. And indeed, Sequoia, together with Kleiner Perkins, they are the two most important VC companies, historically most important VC companies in Silicon Valley. Sequoia, essentially, there's a bit of a joke going around with Silicon Valley entrepreneurs whenever they're fundraising money. Whenever there's something good which is presented, the standout question seems to be is, why hasn't Sequoia invested yet? It's a pillar of the VC community in Silicon Valley, and crucially, it runs money for a lot of ultra-high net worth individuals from the Muslim world, family offices, and also sovereign wealth funds. So there is big Islamic money in Sequoia. And also, the companies which they back are global companies. So indeed, a quarter of the world is Muslim. So a lot of these companies are going to have Muslim consumers, whether it's B2C companies or B2B companies. A lot of these clients, at least a quarter, will be of the Muslim world. And what happens is, indeed, you have this partner named Shaun Maguire, who put on Twitter some very, very incendiary comments regarding Zohran Mamdani and regarding the Islamic community. At one point, indeed, he retropedaled a bit, but by and large, he stuck to his guns, and the CEO of Sequoia, Rulef Bota, essentially said, yes, he's got right to his opinion under freedom of speech, etc. So he was mostly excused. And indeed, he has got a crucial link to Elon Musk, and also he's very active. Shaun Maguire is very active in defense startups. So we're talking about armaments. Now, we need to talk about Sumaya Balbali. Sumaya Balbali is a rock star. Do you hear me? Because she was CEO of Sequoia. She was headhunted for this job. She was picked. She's a woman. She's a practicing Muslim. And if you Google her, you will see a lot of images of her with her veil on. To be headhunted as a CEO of something like Sequoia, you must be outperforming the competition by yards. So I can honestly say, and also from her background, the woman is a rock star. And Sequoia were very, very lucky to have her. When she resigned, and I saw it in the news, one thing which I posted on LinkedIn was that I said, kudos Sumaya Balbali. She's standing up to a huge bully, and she's taking a principled stand. Essentially, she's taking on what is arguably the most important VC of Silicon Valley. And she did so on principles. And I applaud her for this. And in all candor, Sumaya Balbali, if you hear us, reach out. I think you're awesome. I would love to have a conversation with you. Now, what is remarkable is that as a woman, as a lady entrepreneur, as a practicing Muslim, she has shown more courage in the face of discrimination than a lot of politicians of the Islamic world or Islamic politicians in the Western world. She has shown integrity. And as Zohran Mamdani said, what you lack in integrity, you can't make up in experience. To paraphrase one of his beautiful terms of phrase in one of the speeches against Kumu. But what I can tell you about Sumaya Balbali is that she has both integrity and experience. That's a very rare combination. Now, so the fact that she stood up to essentially bullies when essentially the management didn't want to do the right thing, I mean, I think essentially she resigned, which was the best thing to do. I think that speaks volumes as to her courage. And indeed, I mean, do remember she was CEO for a major, I mean, for probably the most important VC in Silicon Valley. People are very well remunerated at Sequoia. Okay, so the fact that she took a position, I think, is remarkable. And also, what is disquieting about this is that because Sequoia is not simply, it's not a mom and pop shop. We're talking about really an entity that raises money from sovereign wealth funds, including a lot of from the Muslim world, family offices, ultra high net worth from the Islamic world, but also Muslims in the West. So the bottom line is she showed courage, but everyone else was eerily silent. I understand that Sequoia gives great returns, but I will tell you something, Hassan. It's not simply about discrimination. Discrimination is the canary in the mine of governance. What is at stake here ultimately is governance. And certainly Shaun Maguire supposedly did very well as a VC, was giving great returns. Sequoia gives very good returns as compared to its peers. Yeah. But the issue that they don't want to address this problem, which is it's not even there's no wokeism idea here. Here, as I said, discrimination and governance, which are very, very central ideas to capitalism. The fact that they didn't want to address it shows that there's something deeper. There's a deeper problem at Sequoia. And I think that a lot of entities who entrust tens of millions, hundreds of millions to Sequoia, failure to see this is, how would I say, a dereliction of duty, especially when you're a custodian of money and you see this and you don't act. That's a question, because indeed today they did want to address this. Tomorrow, what won't they want to address? And as I said, Hassan, I mean, you know me. I mean, I'm a Muslim, but I'm also a libertarian. And as far as I'm concerned, here it's an issue of discrimination and governance. A quarter of the world's population is Muslim, and Islam is a truly great religion. Together with its sister religions of Judaism and Christianity, we worship the same creator God. And blatantly accusing Muslims of being liars on social media, I have my questions.
Yeah, I echo your sentiments. I wrote a piece on LinkedIn talking about how we can't create our own ecosystems as a Muslim global ummah. If we can create our own ecosystem to help foster our own entrepreneurs and investors. But I just want to stick on this point of Sequoia. A lot of these venture capital funds and other corporates in the US, they're seen as the gold standard, right, for a lot of entrepreneurs in the world. But if we look at the statistics, I haven't checked the latest statistics, but from my understanding is that even in things like Y Combinator and other kind of Silicon Valley institutions, you don't see a lot of Muslim, or overtly Muslim, should I say, individuals. And this lady at Sequoia, obviously, she was overtly Muslim, and you're right, she does have like a lot of credentials to back herself, and she was involved in a lot of startups as well. Reza, the Silicon Valley is seen as a gold standard by a lot of entrepreneurs from all backgrounds, all faiths. But from this episode, and this is not the first episode, I think there have been others as well, but this is probably the most public one, which Sequoia hasn't once dealt with, is that there seems to be this creeping Islamophobic attitude towards people. Why do you think that is? Why do you think there is Islamophobia, despite the fact a lot of these venture capital funds and corporates are saying, we're all about diversity, equity, and inclusion? But, when we get into the actual details and specifics, there's still this like looming or lingering Islamophobia.
It's a good question. What happens is that you have right now in the United States, de facto, you have a fascist state. It's not my opinion. It's just you look at what they're doing. Now, I have to bring a bit of background to the United States. The reason why the United States became the dominant superpower is that for a long time, it was willing to accept immigrants from all over the world, come and study, start businesses, and become very, very, very strong components of the American economic ecosystem, including the tech ecosystem. So there's this idea of the American dream, but what happens is that for a long time, America had almost a monopoly on attracting the world's best and brightest. Not everyone made it, but enough people tried that as a whole, America was uplifted. If you look at the truly great entrepreneurs in the United States for the last 50 years, look how many are of an immigrant. I mean, even Elon Musk. Elon Musk is South African. America, okay, attracted the best and brightest of the world and benefited enormously from what I would describe as it was a population dividend given by other countries. And some people, immigrants who became entrepreneurs in America, became fabulously wealthy. Good for them. But there was a lot of people who were essentially collateral damage, never made it. But by and large, overall, America was extremely better off. And also, where America had a big advantage until recently was that it also attracted a lot of immigrants to do, and I don't mean this in a pejorative way, menial jobs. A lot of immigrants work in the restaurant, in cleaning, in all the jobs, in fact.
In the informal sector, you could say.
In the informal sector, but also the immigrants in the United States do all the jobs that a lot of native-born Americans don't want to do. And they are also willing to do it for salaries or fees that are underneath what native Americans would ask for. I even know of a billionaire Indian entrepreneur. When he came to the United States, literally the first thing that he did was washing dishes, being a cleaner. Now he's a billionaire. So you have, indeed, a lot of people can come to the US doing starting with very, very menial, basic jobs, but you will see how they evolve, how they thrive. And now with President Trump kicking out people, including people who have been in the United States legally, legitimately for decades, well, I think that America ultimately is shooting itself in both feet, because the United States became a superpower on the back and on the sweat of immigrants. And New York ultimately is very much the immigrant city. London is an immigrant city, but New York even more. So here, as I said, this discrimination, this Islamophobia, it just shows that there's something deeper and deeper, which is rotten. And that's not good. Because as I said, a lot of these immigrants in the United States, who obviously come from non-Caucasian, non-Christian backgrounds, I mean, suddenly they're being pointed out as being leechers, whereas in fact they were net givers to society. So
I agree with you. I agree. Well, one thing I wanted to ask you was, if we compare the Muslim communities in the UK or Europe to the United States, my understanding, I haven't been to the United States in a long, long time, but but I have a lot of American Muslim friends, and they seem much more integrated into, let's say, public life and political life and economic life, as you've said, compared to, say, like the British Muslims. Now, obviously in the US, it's a much larger population, much larger Muslim diaspora population there, and from all parts of the world, Middle East, Central Asia, South Asia, Africa, and it seems more diverse. Whereas in the UK, you get a lot of South Asian Muslims, predominantly from India, Bangladesh, Pakistan, and now also from Middle East countries and other African countries and elsewhere in the world. But so it sounds like what you're saying, although, America has been historically for the past, say, 100 years or maybe a little bit less than that, has been open to trade, has been open to entrepreneurs, has been open society in terms of like making the American dream. Muslim Americans seem very well integrated, yet there's this like lingering Islamophobic attitude or tenure. Like, what do you think? What do you think's behind that?
There's, in percentage terms, if you're looking throughout the United States, there's a very small population of Muslims. There are certain regions where they are concentrated. For instance, New York has about 900,000 Muslims. But overall, there's a very small community of Muslims in the United States. Now, they are being used as scapegoats. And, that's very unfortunate because, obviously, because Muslims, first and foremost, through Islam, were about trying to help each other and help society. So they are very, very useful as scapegoats. And a lot of people who go online and insult Muslims and accuse them of all kinds of things, mostly don't know about the Muslim community, have never bothered to read the Quran, don't even know that our way of greeting each other is peace be upon you. There was an interesting dispute between Mehdi Hassan of Zeteo and Matt Walsh. And essentially, Mehdi Hassan pointed out to Matt Walsh what Muslims contributed to the United States. And for instance, there's been a number of contributions, major contributions, technologically by Muslims to the United States. And to this day, there's a lot of Muslim tech entrepreneurs in the United States. And if you look at the reality as opposed to what is the propaganda by the media, especially by the social media, what is the reality is that most Muslims in the United States are hardworking, decent folk who just want to have a better lives for their family and their loved ones while contributing to society. And that's a reality. But indeed, now there's a growing Islamophobia. The paradox is that this is very much targeted to your normal middle class, lower middle class Muslim. They're not trying to target Muslims that are ultra affluent because they know that they don't want to pick a fight with ultra-affluent Muslims.
If we just circle back to Sequoia, the way they've handled this is, Sequoia to me is a bit of an interesting one because this individual has made these comments and obviously the lady has resigned and it's been this big controversy. But at the same time, Reza, Sequoia raised funds from, and you've said this, from sovereign wealth funds, from high net worth individuals in Muslim countries, and they invest in startups, of founders who may be Muslim or are based in Muslim countries. Don't you see a bit of a contradiction here that they're saying they're happy to take money, but then at the same time, their top executive is making these kind of statements?
Yes, and that's why I'm telling you that discrimination is the canary in the mine of governance, of corporate governance. And because it's very, very schizophrenic in the sense that on the one hand, indeed, they go raise billions from the Muslim world, and they're also looking to invest in top entrepreneurial talent, regardless of whether it's Muslim or not. But on the other hand, you have got a partner who makes those inflammatory comments, and not even in a private context. He goes on Twitter and he makes it public to the whole world. That's pretty much making a very, very public statement. I understand about freedom of speech, but there's a big difference between freedom of speech in a private context, talk about people, about banter, regardless of your views, and there's quite another position of shouting discriminatory statements from the rooftops. And there, I'm always about separating the wheat from the chaff. As I said, I'm a libertarian. People can have different views. It's your views. You're entitled to it. But on the other hand, it's quite something else to go on a social media and insult someone on the basis of his religion and his origin, and also insult a whole faith. And the worst thing is indeed that within Sequoia, they failed to take any action against Shaun.
Why? Why do you think they failed to take action?
Now, again, So I'm making some, I think they must have had a conversation inside. Now, Shaun Maguire supposedly has been a fairly successful VC and comes from a very specific community. Now, a lot of people in the Silicon Valley are libertarian and believe in freedom of speech. And on the other hand,
when they
indeed,
want to, when they want to be, when they want to.
when it's agreeable to them,
Yeah, exactly.
when it's agreeable to them. So here, it's what the French would call le poids de mesure. It's, I mean, discrimination. But why the top leadership of Sequoia failed to take any actions, we don't know. I don't know how much Sumaya Balbali can openly say, because it's probably that she has got NDAs in place in her contract. But the fact that she resigned, for me, it says it all. It's most likely that there was a long discussion about this within Sequoia, and for some reason, they decided to take the position that they've decided to take.
Do you think Shaun Maguire's relationship with Elon Musk, and he said this on Twitter, which is owned by Elon Musk,
Yeah,
has a role in this?
of course. I mean, essentially, he's got deal flow. That's half of the job as a VC. He had a very, very special relationship with the person who was considered to be the most influential person in the world, ahead of Donald Trump. But I don't know. I think wrong is wrong. The fact that Sequoia failed to act is proof that there's something rotten in the state of Denmark.
With Shaun Maguire, just sticking on him for a minute, he made these statements, and then he tried to caveat or clarify, although he didn't retract. Why do you think he did that? Why didn't you think he just completely withdrew his statements?
I think that obviously he was under some pressure to make sure that he didn't insult the LPs of Sequoia. And why didn't he withdraw his statements? I think in some ways, he doubled down. For me, in some ways, he doubled down. I mean, as I said, he's entitled to his views. My problem is that when you use a platform like Twitter X and say such things, and we have to look at also as to the context that he says, because we have to talk about the election of Zohran Mamdani. But he said so as a partner of Sequoia. He didn't say, okay, this is my views as an individual. No, I mean, he pretty much had a loudspeaker as a partner in Sequoia. Now, the issue is that it also drags in something else, drags in the whole election, the whole cabal against Zohran Mamdani becoming mayor of New York. And this is even deeper, but essentially what you're looking at is that people are trying to influence an election in a city, legitimate election. Some say that New York is the greatest city in the world. It is a major city. It is probably the most important city in the Western world. But there's elections, people vote, and people are entitled to the mayor that they vote for. And the fact that someone from outside is trying to influence the vote with very inflammatory comments, I'd say that, okay, that is very, very, for me, they're trying to deny the democratic process. And that's against American values.
Yes. Just if we transition to, I wanted to talk to you also today about Zohran Mamdani. A year ago, and a lot of people didn't know who this guy was. And he was able to use social media. He was able to, very charismatic, very smooth talker, very young, very different to the other candidates. I think he was able to, relate to a lot of New Yorkers' concerns. And I think the thing that did it for me is when during, I think, one of the campaign speeches or during one of the debates, all the other candidates were talking about, foreign affairs, whereas he was more interested in talking about New York's issues. I mean, just off the cuff, what do you think? What do you make of Zohran Mamdani?
Some background. So Zohran Mamdani is born in Uganda and was naturalized a U.S. citizen. His father is a very distinguished professor at Columbia University. His mother is an acclaimed film director. His mother, Mira Nair, essentially, she's got, you could say, at least two of the classics of Indian cinema, most recently Monsoon Wedding. Zohran is extremely smart and extremely global because indeed they are of Gujarati origin. He's born in Uganda. He moved to the US. He's still in his 30s, extremely dynamic, was able to essentially have a campaign which was lean and mean, which was quirky, which went viral. And I mean, it's a textbook case. It's extraordinary. what you also need to remember is that a bit more than when he started his mayoral campaign, Zohran Mamdani started out with 1% of voting intentions. Essentially, he was a rounding off error. But it's extraordinary how he conducted his campaign, and that he addressed the real issues for the average New Yorker, which is all about making New York affordable again. Indeed, New York, there's a lot of immigrants, there's a lot of people who can't afford New York. And he was very, very vocal about this. And he said it's all about affordability. It's all about New York being a city that takes care of its inhabitants. And I applaud that. And okay, he's a practicing Muslim, and it shouldn't be held against him. But on the other hand, what is despicable is how the other candidates were using the fact that he's a practicing Muslim as something negative. I mean, there's been all kinds of associations thrown at him, that he's anti-Semite, that the fact that he is against the terrible, terrible things that's happening in Gaza right now. And they were essentially dehumanizing him. But what is extraordinary about Zohran is that he's extremely, extremely human. I mean, he's reached out to the New York population, which is extremely mixed and diverse. And I do remember this famous debate when these journalists asked all the candidates, okay, what's the first foreign trip that you will take as a New York mayor? They all said, okay, we're going to go to Israel. He said very plain and simple, I'm going to stay in New York and I'm going to go and talk to the people in the 5 boroughs. And also, I have to commend him on this. He's reached out to the Jewish population of New York and communicated with them. And first and foremost, he's saying, listen, I'm here to do a job, to take care of New Yorkers, to make sure that the city is fair and that people can raise families in a dignified way. That's what Zohran said. Now, obviously, there's a lot of criticism as to how he's going to fund this and etc. But the truth is, what he's proposing is taxing the ultra-rich. Makes a lot of sense. By making New York more affordable, it's making New York also a very good place for the ultra-rich. So the reality is that it's not a situation whereby by paying more taxes, the ultra-rich will be less better off. Quite on the contrary. They will be living in a far better city for everyone, including themselves.
One thing, it's interesting what you're saying, and yeah, it is true. I think, coming from a journalist background myself, a lot of journalists love sound bites. And, I think Zohran Mamdani, a lot of these journalists, they took a sound bite of him. I think he said this on the record that if Benjamin Netanyahu, who has an arrest warrant from the International Criminal Court, which America is not a signatory of, would arrest Benjamin Netanyahu if he did step foot in New York, which I think a lot of journalists, American journalists, fretting about. And, obviously the whole I wouldn't visit Israel as my first foreign visit caused a lot of controversy within the American media. And it's been really interesting to see how the mainstream media in America, whether they're left or right or center, have not endorsed him and have actually tried to smear his campaign quite overtly, and try and, what's also interesting is that he's a member of the Democratic Party, which is one of the parties in the US, and none of the mainstream Democrats, I don't think even Barack Obama or Kamala Harris have openly endorsed him, and Chuck Schumer has not endorsed him. None of the mainstream politicians have endorsed him, probably for their own reasons. We won't get into that, but I think his policies, some of his policies, are kind of a little bit in contradiction with American, free market, neoliberal, laissez-faire capitalism, in the sense that he's promising a lot of free things, free buses, free healthcare, free childcare, all of these things. And it was interesting, just the day before the election, I watched an interview on CNBC with Bill Ackman, who's obviously a very well-known figure, and he was talking about if Zohran Mamdani does become mayor and increases the taxes on the wealthy, a lot of rich people. And this, we've seen this in the UK as well, with a lot of rich people leaving since the election of the Labour government. They're very mobile, rich people. They can just pack up and leave. But it seems now they're all changing their tune a little bit in the sense that they're supporting him. I mean, what do you make of his policies? You know, you're from Belgium, right? And or you live in Belgium. You live in Europe, where it's a much more different political ideology. I live in the UK, where it's very different. Do you think like this kind of socialism would work in America?
Well, he's giving it a shot, and a lot of people have tried to brand him as a communist, but he did say he's a democratic socialist. And in fact, if you compare, let's say, spectrums in America and in Europe, Zohran Mamdani would be in Europe, he would be a centrist, even when he's a democratic socialist. I mean, essentially, Mamdani is just saying that, listen, the system as it is broken. And in any case, to have a wealthy country, you need a very large middle class. And right now, there is a disappearance of the middle class. And I want to take measures to preserve and enhance the middle class. So ultimately what he's doing, whatever he's doing, is very much in favor of capitalism. That's a paradox. So he's in fact capitalism's best friend, because by making sure that there is a very, very large pool of potential consumers, the middle class, there's still prosperity, and that companies don't go bankrupt for lack of consumers. So, I mean, for instance, in Luxembourg, you've got free transport within the confines of Luxembourg. Because the moment you get out of Luxembourg, even if you're on a Luxembourgish train, you've got to pay. They've made all public transport free. Makes a lot of sense, because everyone's traveling to go work and pay taxes. So whatever Zohran is doing, regardless of how they're branding him, is ultimately very good for capitalism.
Why do you think the mainstream doesn't support him, the mainstream media?
Well, not only the mainstream. I mean, the mainstream media, let's just say they are given editorial directions. And he, even on the debates, I remember that famous last questions to Zohran, regarding the existence of Israel. And he actually gave the best answer, the best and truest answer that should have been given. And I applaud him for that. And you know what? He believes in it. That's what matters. Yeah? But also, indeed, the fact that the Democratic Party, major people in the Democratic Party, have not endorsed him, there's a lot of questions here. And I mean, if I had one message for Zohran Mamdani, it would be that success has got many parents and failure is an orphan. Now, there's a lot of people who are coming to him because he's mayor-elect, etc. But okay, his truest people, his best allies are the people who were there when he was at 1%.
Do you think the Democratic Party and also the mainstream media in the United States, they don't really support him because his election now, Reza, is kind of a little bit of a precedent? I think someone on Twitter, a day after he got elected, tweeted about like how there are a lot of mayors in other cities in the United States who have Muslim backgrounds, not necessarily Ugandan Gujarati, but I think that there's a few in like Michigan and in other places, and this could lead to a new generation of candidates who aren't part of the mainstream parties. Do you think that's also a reason as well?
Well, there's a number of new candidates who are throwing their hat in the ring, so to speak. And indeed, a number of them come from non-traditional background, very often from minorities. Now, one observation. A lot of mainstream media, when Zohran Mamdani got elected, their narrative was that it's essentially there's been a wave of democratic voters, because, okay, there were other places where you had Democrats being elected. But I think that people don't quite realize what a watershed moment the election of Zohran Mamdani is. So this is a guy, he's a Muslim, he's of an immigrant background. He had against him major politicians who were immensely funded by a billionaire class.
From both sides, by the way, from both sides.
From both sides, exactly. He had and still has a huge target on his back. I mean, the target on his back is so huge now that you can see it from space. Donald Trump essentially said that he was going to gun him down, was going to deport him to Africa. And right now, he's the embodiment of the opposition to a fascism wave that is happening in America. And his ideas are fairly simple. We want peace. We want everyone to have a decent life. And we want everyone to have a dignified life. And everyone should pay his or her fair share. Revolutionary ideas, I would say, in the United States these days. Yeah. But he's a decent human being and he's trying to do the decent thing.
With, I agree with you, but at the same time, this is not the first time election of a Muslim mayor. My own city in London, we elected Sadiq Khan in 2016 first time, and he's now in his third term, I believe. Like me on a personal level, anecdotally, and I'll be very frank with you, I don't think he's been a very good mayor. I think he's led to a lot of issues, and he's played politics as well. And the city, from my experience, has deteriorated. No, obviously that's done also to the economic conditions from the central government and other things as well. But what I'm saying is that maybe we shouldn't judge his record until he actually does it. Because I know, and obviously the mayor of New York is different to the mayor of London. The mayor of New York actually has a big, $115 billion budget, is responsible for 300,000 people, managing 5 boroughs. You've got to give him time, right? But do you think like a lot of these policies will work out eventually, or do you think it's just going to take a lot of time to fix New York's problems?
Well, a couple of things. Because as a mayor or someone who's elected to a political post, a lot of the things you're dealt cards, and a lot of the cards that you're dealt with are based on what your predecessor did. And also on capitals, on all major cities, you're very, very vulnerable to what central government wants to do for you or refuse to do for you, including from a financial point of view. And right now, for instance, Donald Trump is threatening to close up the financial tap to New York City. So you might get into a job as a politician with the best of intentions, but the reality is who pays and how much money do you? If Zohran Mamdani could only be mayor of New York, I think he'd do a brilliant job, because the way he managed his campaign, the way he had essentially guerrilla marketing, shows that he's got extraordinary entrepreneurial skills, and he can transform a dime into a dollar. That's his quality. But the problem is that people are gunning him down for him. He has got a huge target on his back. And we'll have to see how it works. Also, London, I understand your position. I have had, regarding Mayor Sadiq Khan, different people, I don't live in London, so it's difficult for me to judge. And different people say different things about things, but I think that factually, he needs money from central government. And that will be exactly the same situation in New York. And the question is whether, as a mayor, you're going to be starved of central government funds or not. That is the reality.
We'll have to wait and see.
There's
just 2 areas I want to talk to you about. I'm conscious of time. If we just talk on, we talked about the debacle at Sequoia, we've talked about Zohran Mamdani. All of this, to me, Reza, links to one thing, is that, and it goes back to the LinkedIn post that I wrote a few weeks ago, is that why can't we create our own ecosystems? We can talk about certain countries within the Muslim world. We can talk about the UAE. We can talk about Saudi Arabia. We can talk about Turkey. We can talk about Malaysia. They've all tried to develop their own venture capitals industries to varying degrees. Some have done well, some haven't done well. I had a conversation with Hussein Kanji, which I'll link in the show notes, who's a very well-known venture capitalist here in the UK, and he's invested in quite a few successful startups, including Deliveroo. And I posed this question to him, and I think I posed this to you last time, was that he basically said, why do people want to go to Silicon Valley? Why do people want to go to the US? And he goes, his answer to me was that if it doesn't work in Silicon Valley, or if it doesn't work in the US, then it's not going to work globally. And I've posed this to other people as well. I mean, from your perspective, Reza, why do Muslim entrepreneurs or Muslim investors still want to interact with this Silicon Valley or this American venture capital ecosystem? Is it just purely because of the size and legacy?
Yes, partly. And also remember that, obviously ultra high net worth and family offices are more discretionary. But when you are in a sovereign wealth fund, you have processes and you're looking at track record of entities, which is why you're more likely to put money into Sequoia than, let's say, a new VC. Period. You're not funds. They're not there all about not taking risk. And I don't criticize them for it. I know someone who deals with billionaires in Europe, and his job is mostly about saying no. He says no 99% of the time. Yeah. But the bottom line is that it's a chicken and egg situation. There's not a shortage of talent in the Islamic world. What we are short of is investing in the right entrepreneurs, because most of the best entrepreneurs move to the West. But they can be found. And what you need is governance frameworks. And that is what is ultimately lacking in the West. And, well, I'm saying lacking in the West because I've seen behind the mirror. And but the idea is that what you're having is that you have got, let's say, off-the-shelf products in the West, which are far easier to sell to large custodians of money. They're better organized, generally.
You know, the UAE, in my opinion, has done a really great job in positioning itself as the center of, within the GCC Middle East region.
The capital of capital.
Malaysia's the capital, exactly, Abu Dhabi. But Dubai in particular has done a really great job in trying to create an ecosystem with talent, access to capital. Right. Others are trying to catch up. Saudi Arabia definitely is trying to catch up. Qatar is trying to catch up as well. And then other Muslim countries, you could say, like Malaysia, also trying to position themselves as a hub for venture capital. But I guess my question is, we're an Islamic finance focused podcast predominantly. Why do you think Islamic financial institutions, without naming names, are not supporting entrepreneurs or not giving as much support as they can do? Because, the Islamic finance industry, according to the latest IFDI report, is worth about $6 trillion, and it's going to be $9 trillion or $10 trillion within the next 5 years, or even less than that. So what I'm asking is, why are IFIs not really supporting entrepreneurs or supporting these initiatives to create an ecosystem?
Good question. But again, a lot of Islamic financial institutions are not about taking risk. And also, it's a question of human capital talent, because you can have access to a fair amount of investment opportunities, but separating the wheat from the chaff is difficult. 90% of startups fail. And which is why, a lot of investors, Islamic finance investors, will just go for real estate or something very, very stable. I don't blame them, but it's just they shouldn't have this narrative, okay, we're necessarily trying to back entrepreneurs. I think what is super important is to identify sweet spots and to know how to invest in the market from a market perspective, as opposed to simply trying to necessarily find the individual entrepreneur. What is super important is to have the right kind of deal flow and to have access to the right kind of capital. There was something important that, No Hunger has been working on regarding solving the lack of capital for space technology companies, especially those that had solutions for climate. But indeed, the Islamic connection was proving deeply, deeply problematic to a number of people. But that's another story for another time, I guess. But it's an ongoing story. And shall I simply say that there's nothing much higher than space. And as I said, discrimination is a canary in the mine of governance.
As we bring the podcast to a close, I just wanted to give you the chance or the opportunity to talk about what's happening with you. I know you've been involved with Luxembourg. Would you like to tell our listeners and viewers what's going on?
We are coming to a bit more than an hour. I think that this in itself is a story that will be easily 20 minutes. But I will give you just a short insight. No Hunger and myself, we currently have the test case that is most important. I would say not only Western Europe, but the whole of the European Union. Discrimination in capital markets. I'd have to explain all the background, and that would take us easily 15 minutes. But let's just say that I've decided to do, for the benefit of the Muslim world, what 99.99% of entrepreneurs wouldn't do. I'm currently fighting against a 900-pound gorilla in the name of my faith, and also for one simple reason. According to the UN, by 2050 there's going to be 800 million climate refugees. According to Zurich Insurance Group, by 2050, there's going to be 1.2 billion climate refugees. The mission of No Hunger is to address the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals through the use of space technologies, finance through the impact, ethical, and Islamic capital markets. We want to make sure that the Muslim world pays to avert the climate crisis. We want to ensure that we can transform all those climate refugees into climate and biodiversity farmers. We want to ensure that a lot of people who would otherwise become paupers in the slums of Eastern or the Western world can have dignified lives in the countryside, happy with their families, and being able to provide for their loved ones.
That's fair enough. If there's anything else you're working on, or anything that's cooking?
Well, I mean, we are looking at doing something major for healthcare in two major countries in Africa. I mean, major countries in Africa, using Islamic capital markets. We're looking at funding climate adaptation and climate mitigation, especially in the maritime sector, with a number of very long-term thinking stakeholders. We're looking at water, because the water crisis is going to be terrible. There's going to be billions of people who are not going to be able to have access to adequate water in the coming decades. It's an issue. It keeps me awake at night. And the issue is that if we are not able to address all these, the problem is not simply climate refugees. The problem is that all this leads to war. And any student of history knows that historically this is the case.
That's fair enough. And what's the best way to reach you, Reza? Is it still on LinkedIn, and what's your social media?
Still on LinkedIn, and feel free to add my email address. People are free to reach out to me. Indeed, I think that there'll be a lot happening regarding my Luxembourg case. There's a lot to explain, and also hopefully, inshallah, there'll be some very positive developments in the coming weeks and months.
Inshallah. Reza Jafari, we've got to do a part 4, but I really appreciate you coming on the podcast.
Thank you very much. You keep safe.
Take care. Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum salam.